Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of the Next Sunday podcast. Here I am with the man, the myth, the legend, Jim Sheppard. They weren't for sure if I was describing you, Jim. They were actually like,
you had a special guest.
Yeah.
It's like, wait, Frank just said the man, the myth,
guest.
the legend. It indicates that there's a guest going to be here today. And then he said Jim.
Yeah.
It's like, well,
wait a second. Wah, wah, wah.
but that's what we do to keep
That's what we
everybody
do.
alert.
Yeah,
just kind of make sure, hey, pop up, get your
Exactly.
attention right here at the front of the Next Sunday podcast,
We're
because
here.
what happens
Next Sunday
could change
everything.
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 Not some things.
And so here we are. I'm excited about the topic today.
What you got today?
And other people are excited about this topic because you've written on this topic, and now we're moving to this podcast forum to dialogue about it a little bit more. I've got some questions for you I want to push in on a topic
I like
that
it
you
when you
are
give me that
passionate
look.
about. Yeah, a
I've
little
got some
wink, like, oh yeah, I'm
I've
gonna.
got some questions.
That's my way of saying I'm going to poke the bear, guys. I'm just going to mess a little bit.
Stay tuned. Stay tuned.
So we're talking about something that, honestly, when you wrote the blog post about it, I was surprised at the level of engagement.
Ooh,
There was,
wow.
I mean, it really
Wow.
popped off. And one of our most engaged blogs ever. And yet the topic is simply from tax deduction to discipleship.
Apparently, that is a clickbait title.
Yeah.
Because
Who
on
knew?
our Substack channel, which is where this appeared first, it'll be on our Generis blog as well.
Mhm.
But on Substack, it was the largest single 24-hour viewing of anything we've done in the history of publishing on Substack. And there's three of us, Dave
incredible.
Travis, Greg Ligon, and me,
Yeah.
that share a channel.
Yeah.
And so I knew that it was a topic. Remember how this got started? I came back and I said to you, I said, I just met with a church. I'm not going to name them. Very smart church,
Yep.
very large church, very smart church. And so we just got into this idea of talking about, hey, you know that tax policy is working against us in the church in terms of developing giving if we're not focused on discipleship.
That's so
And there
great.
were 4 leaders in the room, really smart guys,
Mhm.
every one of them.
Mhm.
And they looked at me like I'd landed from Mars because they didn't know what I was talking about. I thought to myself. And so as I went into it, I got to the end of it, and one of them said, where can I find more on this that you've written?
Mhm.
And I said, I haven't.
Yeah, but I will.
But wait till next week.
But wait, there's
And I'll
more.
send it. So I sent them the draft.
Oh, cool.
So they got the draft,
that's
kind of
great.
the unedited draft,
Yeah.
because I was like, that's where it started. That was
Yeah.
the room where it happened, Hamilton.
Yeah.
And so I wanted them to have it. And then I knew it would get traction. I didn't know it would get that much traction, Frank. So I'm excited to talk about this today.
Yeah, rightly so. Rightly so. So why don't you go ahead and calibrate us on where we're at today, why the topic came up in that meeting, why you were talking about other things, and all of a sudden, obviously, you shared that in that meeting. What triggered that for you to bring it to the top for church leaders to even be thinking about right now?
Well, you and I actually did a webinar with ECFA,
Yeah.
Evangelical Council on Financial Accountability, last fall.
Yeah.
And you and Jake Lapp and I did that.
Mhm.
And Jake's question was, how does the One Big Beautiful Act bill affect giving?
Yeah.
And what I said was, well, it's not that. You got to go back to the Tax Cut and Jobs Act of 2017.
Right.
That's what really affected giving. The One Big Beautiful Act bill just kind of takes it and keeps it in place for a longer period of time. Now, what do I mean by that? The thing that a lot of people, especially church leaders, overlooked, and once you point it out, they're like, oh, I see that, was in 2017, there was such a big shift in tax policy. I'll give you the details of it in a second.
Mhm.
Let's go to the end. Such a big shift in tax policy that it changed dramatically the number of people who claim itemized deductions versus the standard deduction.
Yeah.
Prior to 2017, the enactment of the Tax Cut and Jobs Act bill, about 34 to 37% of Americans itemized deductions. Let's just round that off and call it 1 out of 3.
Sure.
Okay? Now, after that, when you have a substantially increased standard deduction,
Mhm.
it shifted that from about 34 to 37% to about 9%.
Yeah.
About 1/4. So it was 1 in 3 Americans would itemize. Now it's roughly 1 in every 10 or 11.
Yeah. Yeah.
Frank, that's a big shift.
Huge
It's
shift.
a massive shift.
Huge shift. So let's talk about, just to make sure our audience is all on the same page, standardized versus itemized deduction. What was the pivot? What's the difference in that? What does that mean for everybody?
Yeah, so in the Tax Cut and Jobs Act, the standard deduction almost doubled. It went from roughly from $13,000. This is for a married couple filing jointly. Rather than going into all the details of singles and filing separately, let's just hold it down to married couples filing jointly for the purpose of example. It went from $13,000 to $24,000.
Yeah.
All right. Now, here's what that means is on itemized deductions, for most Americans, we're talking about Schedule A.
Yeah.
Schedule A,
Yep.
where you get deductions for charitable contributions. You get deductions now restored for state and local income taxes. You get property taxes, the tax you pay on your car, your ad valorem tax, medical deductions if you qualify for that. I mean, all of those things are
mortgage interest.
Mortgage interest. Yeah, that's another big. That's another.
Yeah.
So the two biggies for most people who itemized, middle class America, is the mortgage and the charitable deductions.
Yeah.
Right. So now what happens is, if you can now take $24,000 without having to either itemize or prove that you had mortgage interest or charitable deductions, for many of those people, that's a much bigger number than their Schedule A was.
Actual. Yeah.
So it's like, I don't need Schedule A anymore. I'll just take the $24,000.
Yeah.
Let's just say, for example, somebody had, they were able to itemize under the old schedule. They had $15,000.
Yeah.
Charitable deductions, mortgage interest, and anything else they had, $15,000. Well, now, same thing, next year, you get an additional $9,000 off of taxable income with no shift in giving or anything.
Right.
So, and you don't have to give anything. You can actually give nothing and take $24,000.
Right.
I don't know that people did that, but maybe some did. I don't know.
So why? So that tax law changed. How was that actually playing out and impacting how people chose to give? Once again, we know itemized versus not. They didn't have to give. Where's that motivation? How much motivation was there for giving based on tax incentive before, now? Like just the average American, how much are they factoring that in or letting that influence their decisions?
Yeah, so if you're a middle-class American, take the blended rate from the various tax brackets, you were probably paying somewhere between 28 and 30% income tax on your taxable income. So think about it this way, Frank. If you gave $6,000 and you're in the 30% tax bracket, you're actually getting an $1,800 tax break for that. So the net cost of your deduction is $4,200.
Yep.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
I mean, I think that's the answer to your question. And, there are lots of people for whom the tax deduction was not a primary motivator. It's like, oh, well, I'll do that. In fact, Nancy and I look at it as the tax motivation allows us to give more.
Right.
We don't look at it as
Rather
getting a discount.
As
like, well, gosh, if I give $6,000 and it only costs me $4,200, what do I need to do for it to only cost me $6,000?
Yeah.
Right. So I can actually give $6,000.
Yeah.
More than $6,000, and it only cost me $6,000.
Right.
That's the other way of looking at it. Right. For spiritually motivated people would look at it that way. But we have lots more people in the church that are not spiritually motivated when it comes to their giving. That's not judgmental.
Wow.
That's not meant to.
Yeah.
It's just that's the way it is.
Yeah.
You know that, and I know that.
So that's why we see the surge of end-of-year giving, right?
Surge in end-of-year giving.
Why, but a reason
it's
why.
It's a reason why you see that. Oh, wait a second.
Yeah.
I can give it to the church or give it to the government.
Right.
Right? Well, now, under the Tax Cut and Jobs Act, we'll talk about One Big Beautiful Act in a minute. Under Tax Cut and Jobs Act, there's no real incentive for you to do that because you're going to get $24,000 off of your taxable income, whether you give $1 or a lot of dollars.
Let's pause on money for a second. Okay, we'll pause. I just want to do a juxtaposition here real quick. The reality is society is changing and all these rules and all these laws help inform that. The way my mind goes is just the same way this is true. What you're saying is some people give or choose to give more based on that tax deduction. It's a motivator. It's a logical way to look at it. Go, well, I could give it to government or I could mobilize it for good work. Why wouldn't I do that? And that becomes a pushing point. It's very much like the fact that people today are having kids later in life. Now you're like, wait, what does that have to do with all this? Here's a reality shift for the church, okay? And so I want to juxtapose the two. The reality is when as society, people were having kids at a younger age. They honestly were in a different season and needed more support, more help. They were more unsure with life. And so there was always this pattern of the church of people returning to church when they had kids because they needed some support, some infrastructure. It felt good to come back. Now that people are having kids later in life, they're on their second career. They're no longer driving the car that their parents helped them get. They're in a new season. They've moved. They've already kind of got situated in some sense of season. So there's a little less uncertainty. So the thing that the church used to know as a truth, which was, oh, well, if we lose them for a season, once they have kids, there's this gravitational pull to come back. Well, the reality is because people are having kids later in life, that gravity has shifted. The same is true for what you're saying with taxes is going, hey, that motivator that was this intrinsic, extra helpful motivator to help people give, that is going away or has been modified greatly. So these outside forces that kind of help serve the church in these kind of random ways are getting messed up as we go along with society. So the gravitational back for kids shifted. It is shifted. If people don't recognize that, they're missing it. The same as what you're saying is that because of these tax implications, well, that shouldn't be the primary reason that people give. The reality is it's a motivator and a factor, and everything is shifted. The gravity looks different. And I think the reason that this resonated so much with churches is because they're like, oh, I don't know that we had that as a real factor in thinking that things have shifted. They're like, it's not that they weren't aware or clueless at all. They just hadn't put the two and two together to go, oh, the gravity, the societal norm, that gravity that helped pull some generosity toward the church, that shifted. And so if we're not teaching, discipling, continuing to explain what God says about money and how it applies, we're losing the kind of bluebird that was a tax credit in some ways.
And that, friends, concludes today's Next Sunday episode because there's your mic drop moment right there. You're not supposed to do mic drop moments in the middle of a podcast episode.
Processing out loud.
I know you did.
I'm just processing.
I know, and I saw where you were going with that, and I was like, that was so good because that's the other side of
gravity
this.
shift.
That's what we're talking about. That's what we're really talking about, right? And so what are we talking about? Because when we get to the One Big Beautiful Act, so the Tax Cut and Jobs Act only went through the end of 2025. And then say, summer, early fall of 2025, there was a question among those of us in philanthropy and charitable giving and giving development as to, hey, where's the tax law going to go? We didn't know.
Yeah.
We even did a session at in one of our team meetings where I went through that and I was like, hey guys, we don't know where this is going to land. June of last year. Well, it landed. And the One Big Beautiful Act bill is where it landed. And what it did was it took all of these changes and not only made them permanent, it indexed them upward and made them larger. So now, if I recall, I think it's 31,200. I may be off on the month, but it moved it up from 24,000 for filing jointly up to like 30, and it indexes it every year for cost of living. But wait, there's more. This is like an infomercial, Frank. But wait, there's more. They added a $2,000 above the line deduction for anything that you give if you're not itemizing. So think about this. You can actually take the $31,200, whatever that number is, that amount as your standard deduction, give nothing. You could live in an apartment, for example, not have any mortgage interest, no medical deductions, no nothing. The government is giving you that standard deduction. And the only motivation you have for giving is to give $2,000 so you can get the above the line deduction. So the One Big Beautiful Act bill, from this perspective, there are some helpful things in it. I'm not talking politics. I'm just talking about how this affects philanthropy. Don't read red, blue into any of this because that's not where I'm going today. This is just talking about how this affects giving. And so now what we have is it's enacted for a much longer period of time. It's here to stay, probably. It's going to be hard to take it back. The other thing is that for those of us who do itemize, but wait, there's more. For those of us who do itemize, there's actually a penalty in there because we now have what I call a haircut of 0.5% of AGI that comes off of our charitable giving. Right? So let's just say that I gave I don't know, $25,000. I'm trying to think how much would I have to give, and then maybe some mortgage interest to get above the standard deduction so I could itemize. Let's just say I gave $25,000 in a year. And let's just say that I'm a tither. So I gave my taxable income was $250,000. You take 0.5% of that, which is $1,250, if my math is correct, and that's a haircut off of the $25,000. So I only get to deduct $23,750 in charitable deductions, right? So what let's not go into any more details. The tax policy is not helping you.
Yeah.
And it was propping up some giving somewhere along the way inadvertently. And now, the Bible alone is sufficient motivation to teach discipleship and giving. But now we have an additional one. Yeah. The tax policy is working against us. Yeah. And Frank, you look at enough giving data, and I look at enough giving data that you can see what looks to be like a donut pattern. There's there's a few people up here giving a very disproportionate share of the total. 9% in larger churches, what we see over and over and over again. 9% of the givers giving somewhere between 58 and 62% of the money. You and I see it over and over again. And then this really large, more than 50% group that are giving less than $1,000, less than $1,000 a year.
That's good.
Right? And so we're seeing that gap.
Good perspective.
And that has exacerbated after 2017. Yeah. And so I think that's the correlation. And what it does is it causes, that's why the title of the article was From Tax Deduction to Discipleship. Honestly, Claude gave that to me. Yeah. Because I had 4 or 5 titles and I was like, hey, this content, I want it to be compelling. I wrote the content, but I don't have the title. And when I saw that, I was like, that's it. There you go. That's what I'm talking about right there. Tax deduction has been an inadvertent propping up measure. Yeah. And now we need to get back to the basics. Your giving is not because you get a tax deduction. It's not because your church needs it. It's because you need to worship God.
That is so good, Jim. And I'll say it's going to lead to some unique behaviors. And on the financial side of things, financially savvy people could very well go, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to load up my giving in 1 year. I'm going to double give. I'm going to give like for next year, this year, whatever.
You're going to actually teach the cheat code.
I'm going to load up in 1 year.
Code.
Well, I'm trying to teach our pastors how to be aware, how we've got to explain that it is not in the best interest of individuals to go, hey, I can out multiply what God could do with my generosity, which is where people are out strategizing this thing, right? So what they're going to do is you may see giving patterns where somebody withholds their giving for a year. They can take the standard tax deduction without giving anything at all. And then if you're going to load up the next year. So you can actually go every other year and kind of play a game with the system to make sure you get bang for your buck. And then the free bucks that are coming from the government in the offset year. You can kind of play around with this in some unique ways. We're going to see more and more integration of DAFs through all this as well.
Well, that's where we want to introduce that. Yep. That's the tool where the giver could do that without their giving being twice as much in 1 year and nothing in the other year. You could put the money into a donor advised fund, and then you could distribute, let's just say, $8,000 this year and $8,000 next year, or whatever your number is, right? So you could take the $16,000 plus your mortgage interest plus whatever you have, get above the standard deduction and itemize in 1 year, but you've got all the money sitting in your donor advised fund. Right. If you're going to do it, that would be the recommended way to do it.
That's the way to do it.
And everybody has donor advised funds now.
Well, especially when you say everybody, the reality is
financial institutions. Financial institutions have them. So Schwab, Fidelity,
Vanguard, all of them,
NCF, whoever it is that you're. In my church, our denomination has donor advised funds. In our denominational trust, we have.
And so what we're seeing with that is that's just unique. And so it's just we need to shift gears into the discipleship side. What do we do about this? And this may be part 1, and we'll have to unpack this more. But here's what we're seeing. People can strategize all they want, and that's great. But the reality is there's something that works in the heart of the people that we need to help them shift, because DAFs are going to become more and more present because more and more entities have DAFs, have options. That means there's more and more marketing dollars behind DAFs. It's going to come up in more conversations. So it's going to cause a lot of your individuals to be more aware of tax strategy. the idea of tax, it is an industry that is flourishing and growing in tax strategy. How can I maximize my dollars? How can I do this? It's taken a whole new level of credibility for middle class America, where that was kind of saved for an elite or a high income, right? And so it just puts it in a different place. So because of that, we've got to disciple our people better. We've got to explain what the Bible teaches around generosity, which you've done time and time again on this podcast for sure. But we can't take anything for granted that the government incentives or programs are actually going to work in our favor or anything like that, and just kind of bank on that. That is gone, or should be gone from our mind. And we should go, okay, let's move away from tax incentives as the reason to give to the local body of Christ and instead teach discipleship.
That's what we're really talking about.
Yeah.
So, one of the ways that I might say it is that we've got to get to the heart of the issue. And the heart of the issue is that the heart is the issue.
Yeah.
Right? And if we miss that, is it nice that Nancy and I have, the tax code to allow us to give more and net the same? That's helpful. It's not our primary motivation, frankly. We don't sit down and do calculations based on that. But when it comes tax time, we're obviously going to take that deduction because it's allowed, and we can legally do that, and it boosts our ability to give.
Yeah.
But for those who are what we're going to call, I think this is a topic that you and I and several of us that have been working with our Generosity 360 framework, which is designed to help churches increase generosity without a campaign.
Yeah.
That what we're seeing is the big idea is to focus on undeveloped givers.
Yeah.
And what we're trying to say today is this tax policy shift probably hits your undeveloped givers much harder than it hits your developed
that's
givers.
Good
right?
perspective.
And so it will get in the way of helping you to help these people find their way to becoming developed givers. And the pathway is just to help them see it never was about that. It never was.
So as we wrap up this episode, here's what I want to challenge you with, Jim. You sit down with somebody. You're at a church. You're at your church. And the pastor's asked you to go talk to somebody because they are out-strategizing God with their tax strategy. They have become so consumed with the tax strategy that they're missing the heartbeat of generosity. Where do you begin that conversation?
Frank, I'm like a broken record on this verse because I just love it so much because I think it just says so much to us about why we give in the first place. And it's Deuteronomy 14, 22 and 23, when he's telling us how much to give, the tithe. And these are fellowship offerings. Remember, there's five types of offerings. Fellowship is one of the offerings where we're acknowledging our community with God and our relationship with him. And so these are fellowship offerings. At the place I will designate in the presence of the Lord, he tells us where to do that. That phraseology is always a house of worship. But the big idea is why we do that in the first place. So that we might learn to revere the name of the Lord our God always. And so I think I would probably read that verse with them and say, help me understand how your giving is following this pathway right here.
Wow.
Right? And just let the Holy Spirit do the work, right? Because what I've learned, you and I talked about this in kind of another context the other day, is that a lot of times if we tell people what their problem is, when we walk away, so does the advice.
Yeah.
It's not in the room. But if I can leave something behind for you to deal with and grapple with God on the topic, then whatever happens is his idea and your idea, and it's not really me, right? And so that's where I'd want to go, is just to find, there might be another text that I would use, but that would be, mine. Maybe I'd go to, 1 Chronicles 29:17. Lord, David, who had just given, for context, we just recalculated that in the last year. David had just given $20 billion.
Yeah.
I had to recalculate because gold is now almost $5,000 an ounce, $4,930 or something like that. Silver's like almost $100 an ounce. So when you use that and recalculate, David had just given $20 billion, Frank.
Yeah.
And he's saying this, I know, O Lord, that you test the heart. And in the uprightness of my heart, I have given freely and willingly. and maybe just read that and it's like, hey, so run this through your decision making through this verse right here and tell me how you get to this place.
Yeah.
Because it's hard to.
That's so good.
If you're using the tax policy piece as your primary motivator, as opposed to, hey, I get this, so I can use this to give more, as opposed to, hey, I can minimize, or hey, now that I don't get a deduction for it, and I take this big standard deduction, I don't even have to give because it doesn't even benefit me anymore. Never was the purpose, man. It was never about you. It was about God's greater glory and your greater joy, which comes through this act of learning to revere the Lord, the name of the Lord your God always. That learn to is that ongoing sanctification. It's always happening. And you know this from me. I've said this many times. I believe, and you've heard me say this many times, Frank. I've said this on this podcast, but let's say it again today. I believe that money and possessions and our faith and how we relate to it is one of the ways that God sanctifies us, transforms us in a way that nothing else in this life can. And if you're going to sit down and do your calculations based on tax policy, you're missing that altogether. And that was what it might be God's intent for your life. So don't do that.
That's so good. Jim, this has been great. I see why. First of all, you're passionate about it. Obviously, that comes through very clear.
Get a former CPA in the room who's got hooked on this and been doing it for 3 decades. You're likely to get a little bit of conversation.
A few opinions. A few opinions.
A little passion. I ran up a little bit on the passion meter a couple of times.
That's so good. But this was helpful today. I think it's good perspective and good insight for our leaders. So, hey, thanks for joining the Next Sunday podcast. We'll see you again real soon.